I am reminded of the deeply touching letters, cards, and messages which so many of you have sent my wife. Fire doesn't just destroy, it devours everything in its way, objects, emotions, even royal pride. Queen Camilla, a royal wrapped in ego and ambition, became both the spark and the flame that set Buckingham's walls whispering. What began as a quiet power move soon ignited a rebellion within the palace. Awkward silences, bruised egos, and the quiet dismissal of those who dared to question her rise. She climbed fast, burning bridges on her way to the crown. But when the fire finally dimmed, all that was left was smoke, silence, and one haunting question. Was the crown really worth the ashes? And how did the king react when his own queen turned his grandest moment into a scandal? It all began with what insiders called the fuel-soaked banquet, a once-in-a-lifetime summit at Windsor Castle. An event meant to be the crowning achievement of King Charles Roman III's reign. Every detail had been planned to perfection. This wasn't just another state dinner, it was history in the making. Presidents, diplomats, and world leaders filled the golden halls, including Germany's President Walter Steinmeier and his elegant wife. For King Charles, this was the moment to show the world that the monarchy still stood tall, stable, proud, and united. After the chaotic transition that followed his mother's passing, the public's eyes were locked on him, waiting to see if he could carry her legacy. The banquet was his chance to silence doubts and prove that the monarchy could still shine in a modern world. But this night was never meant to be ordinary. A sovereign's first state banquet carries centuries of weight. It's more than food and speeches. It's a message to the world, a royal declaration written in gold and candlelight. Every guest, every toast, every note played by the orchestra whispered one truth. This is a new reign, a new era, a new crown. Windsor Castle glowed like a jewel that evening, yet behind its sparkling chandeliers, tension simmered in the air. Whispers spread among the staff that something was off, something dangerous. What happened next would turn this grand occasion into the palace's darkest rumor. The so-called Windsor night soon became legend, a night drenched in mystery, wrapped in secrecy so thick that even insiders dared not speak of it. Only two people, two royal figures, know what truly happened behind those locked doors. The rest remained sealed in the royal family's most confidential files. It was supposed to be a symbol of unity. Instead, it became the match that lit the fuse beneath the monarchy. A night that changed everything, born in October inside the glowing halls of Windsor Castle. The very same night that would later be known as the beginning of the fire that consumed the royal household. It was a night where every glance mattered, where everyone wanted to shine brighter than the chandeliers themselves. And in a royal household built on pride, attention, and quiet rivalry, that kind of night was bound to stir chaos. It was the perfect playground for whispers, envy, and sparks, a breeding ground for the kind of drama only the palace could host. And right in the center of it all was Queen Camilla, the royal wrapped in ambition and flame. Camilla wasn't just part of the night. She was its heartbeat. She thrived on the gaze of others, on the flash of cameras, and the hush that followed her entrance. She wanted every headline, every whisper, every eye fixed on her. For her, this banquet wasn't just diplomacy. It was destiny, a grand stage to show her worth, to prove that she belonged not just beside the king, but above the noise of every doubter watching from afar. But King Charles saw things differently. He didn't want extravagance. He wanted control. He planned every detail of the Windsor gathering down to the final candle, terrified of leaks, gossip, or scandal. For years, his household had been haunted by the press. Every slip magnified, every misstep turned into a headline. And he knew rumors didn't need truth to grow. They only needed space. This time, though, Charles demanded perfection. Perfection in Windsor, to him, this wasn't just a dinner. It was an opportunity to silence critics, to present a monarchy still strong, steady, and dignified. But Camilla wasn't after calm. She wanted spectacle. She wanted her moment to blaze across the world's front pages. He wanted restraint. She wanted glory. And between those clashing desires, the air grew hot enough to spark a storm. Tension rippled through the corridors of Windsor. The king could feel it, so he acted swiftly, calling a meeting to lay down his plans before things spiraled out of hand. The chosen battleground, the green drawing room, once a place of royal portraits and polite conversations, now carried the pulse of confrontation. Charles entered with purpose, his voice firm yet weary. He reminded them that the crown's strength lay in unity, in discipline, in loyalty. To him, the monarchy was alive, the people its limbs, the palace its heart, and he, the lungs that kept it breathing. If one faltered, the entire body would collapse, and so that meeting wasn't just another royal formality. It was a quiet battle for survival, a test of balance and power during a time when the kingdom's flame flickered dangerously low. The green drawing room at Windsor stood ready, a stage set for the confrontation that would decide whether the royal fire would blaze on or fade into silence. The green drawing room glowed with royal splendor, a space drenched in the quiet grace of history. Portraits of long-gone monarchs watched from their gilded frames, their painted eyes heavy with judgment, their legacies echoing in the still air. Around a vast mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, sat the architects of royal order, the household that kept the monarchy breathing. At the head of the table sat King Charles Roman III, every inch the ruler he'd trained his whole life to become. This was his moment, his throne, his authority, his chance to command with poise and power. He radiated the calm confidence of a man who had waited decades to lead. And now he was determined to prove he was ready. The agenda was clear. Plans for Windsor, the grandest event of his reign. And every soul in that room knew its weight. Members of the monarchy, senior staff, and top officials filled the seats. Charles wasted no time. His voice cut through the tension like a blade as he dished out tasks and responsibilities. What seemed like mere protocol would soon be remembered as the spark that ignited the blaze. Each role handed out carried unseen consequences, quiet rivalries wrapped in royal etiquette. Prince William was given control of the ceremony's flow, including the opening toast, an honor that placed him right at the heart of the event. Princess Anne took charge of all security operations, especially for the international guests. Princess Kate was tasked with overseeing media coverage, ensuring that every image reflected perfection and stability. Then all eyes turned to Queen Camilla, her title, handling the banquet seating and reception room decorations. The words dropped heavy in the air. To everyone else, it sounded proper and polite. To her, it was a humiliation wrapped in silk. The queen consort reduced to planning centerpieces. The phrasing of her role was drenched in ceremonial caution. She was to accompany the king, support the sovereign's duties, and stand precisely inches behind him. Every inch behind him, Camilla's pride flinched. Her interactions for the night were already chosen for her, limited to the spouses of foreign dignitaries. Important, yes, but secondary, restrained, powerless, to her. It felt like a cage built of protocol and subtle control. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable, but inside her thoughts burned. Each word, support, assist, accompany, landed like a dagger to her pride. It was as if her identity was being trimmed to fit the king's shadow. Those around her felt the chill, sensing her silent anger, filling the air like smoke. Prince William, noticing the tension, avoided her gaze, yet couldn't ignore the storm brewing in her silence. Everyone in that room knew it. The queen was seething beneath her royal calm. Shock struck her to the core. The cloud of tension wasn't invisible. Princess Anne and Princess Kate noticed it immediately. As the unease grew, Queen Camilla shifted in her seat, fumbled with papers, pursed her lips, and subtly fidgeted. Every motion screamed discomfort and silent frustration. Yet King Charles seemed oblivious to the storm brewing beside him. This bruised her pride and stung her ego like a cold gust of wind. She felt caged, unseen, trapped in a role that was the exact opposite of what she had envisioned. Yet through all of it, she remained quiet, quiet and uncomfortable. Perfectly described her demeanor during this fateful meeting. The gathering concluded as all such meetings do. King Charles, satisfied with the strength and security of the plan, gave his formal assent. He declared the arrangements excellent and instructed everyone to proceed exactly as outlined. Courtiers nodded with subtle bows, gathering their papers and marching off. Confident that the flawless blueprint they had helped craft would now unfold without error, they left the king and queen alone, surrounded by the silent, watchful eyes of history's portraits, entirely unaware that the most crucial piece of this plan, the queen's compliance, had been left unaccounted for. They had secured the king's approval, but failed entirely to secure the queen's consent. In matters of protocol, the king's word is final. But what happens when that word harms his partner, his second in command? If he cannot see her feelings, what are these emotions worth? And were they justified? Camilla's sentiments burned quietly, her ego wounded as the king proceeded, focused and intent, his gaze taking in every member of the room. He spoke with authority and presence. In a strange way, it almost seemed as if he knew Camilla wouldn't openly defy the role assigned to her. That's why he mentioned her name last. As he said it, he lowered his voice, calmly meeting her eyes before stating her duties for the banquet, the seating arrangements, and reception room decor. The moment hung in the air, plunging the room into hushed silence. Prince William stole one quick glance at Camilla, while Princess Anne bowed her head to rearrange papers, avoiding her gaze. Camilla remained frozen, hands trembling, her expression uneven. In that instant, she felt betrayed. The greatest betrayal she had ever known. She had stood by Charles through thick and thin, offering unwavering support and love. She hadn't deserved this treatment. At the very least, she shouldn't have been reduced to the role of a palace aide. Yet the king, oblivious, continued his instructions. All protocol was to be followed with no defiance, no hesitation, and no deviation from the outlined procedures. Camilla turned ghostly pale, pale to the point she barely looked like the royal everyone expected her to be. Her lips were dry, as if thirst had clung to her since birth, and her eyes dimmed, hollowed by the weight of countless unseen battles. One word in particular made her blood run cold: protocol. It was the chain around her neck, a cage crafted by the king, who demanded nothing less than a flawless performance from his household. Every reminder emphasized authority, obedience, and absolute conformity. No unilateral actions, no deviations, no sparks of independence. Every command felt like an arrow piercing her pride. It was as if the king's words were carefully sharpened to place her exactly where she didn't want to be, a royal in name only. The weight of authority felt like the final straw, striking at the part of her that hated being controlled. A wounded wolf awakened inside her. Hostility surged, the need to prove herself flared, and the desire to strike back rose like fire. The meeting ended. The courtiers filed out, leaving the room deceptively empty. But Camilla's storm was only beginning. She stood abruptly, walking frantically from the room, her composure cracking under the strain. King Charles noticed immediately. He turned, expecting to see calm, satisfaction, perhaps pride, but instead he met a silence colder and harder than the marble fireplace. Her stillness radiated tension like a powder keg ready to ignite. Camilla's grace had evaporated. What remained was barely contained fury. The years of meticulous control she had practiced were chipping away, emotions she had suppressed for decades. Resentment, indignation, defiance rose to the surface like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about a banquet or ceremonial duties. It was a battle for her very existence within the rigid monolithic structure of the crown. For more than 30 years, she had endured relentless scrutiny, public opinion, the merciless press, and even open hostility from within the royal institution itself had tried to break her spirit. Yet she had persisted, loyal and unwavering by Charles's side, believing that one day her sacrifices, her patience, and her brilliance would be recognized. She had waited for this moment, the zenith of her journey, the threshold of the event that should have cemented her power and status as queen. Instead, she was handed a script that reduced her to a decorative extra more than an insult. It was the eraser of her entire life's work. Her intellect, her strategy, the guidance she had offered Charles in navigating treacherous paths to the throne, all dismissed in favor of a caricature. Her enemies had always painted her as a woman of ambition, someone who, having gotten what she wanted, should now fade quietly into the background. But that woman, the queen, was no longer willing to be hushed. What remained was a wounded animal, fierce and calculating, craving validation and plotting revenge against the very authority that sought to contain her. What would this animal do to reclaim her pride and assert power when her authority had been set ablaze? As the palace exploded into frantic preparations for the upcoming gathering, staff moved with urgency, chasing deadlines, arranging tables, polishing silver, and coordinating every detail. The Queen, however, was nowhere to be seen. She held a crucial role in the success of the event. Yet, she chose to vanish like a ghost, leaving the household scrambling in her absence. Royal aides later recalled seeing her enter her private chambers, her posture defeated yet tense, her expression tight with frustration. She demanded to be left alone, displaying subtle, unmistakable hostility. Meanwhile, the rest of the palace raced against time, orchestrating a flawless event that would now have a missing queen. Locked away, unseen, Camilla became a quiet storm. Staff tried repeatedly to draw her out, offering tea after tea. Each cup left untouched and growing cold. In the large mirror of her private room, she confronted her reflection. Exhaustion on the surface, suppressed fury boiling just beneath. She sat like a time bomb, every thought fueled by anger, wounded pride, and the sting of belittlement. Only her confidant, Mrs. Hill, was allowed inside. Camilla muttered endlessly to herself, repeating phrases like, reception room decorations, over and over. Each repetition laced with scoffs, sarcasm, and disbelief. A duty that countless queens before her had accepted now felt like a direct insult to her very being. Moments earlier, she had sent her proposed plan to the king and committee, an approved blueprint, but it meant nothing to her in this moment of rage. Mrs. Hill hesitated, torn between worry and pity, sensing the storm ready to break. After a tense pause, Camilla straightened, bowing slightly, and asked if she could report back to the king on the reception plans and seating arrangements. That question was no mere inquiry. It was the spark that pulled her from her hate-induced trance. It gave her the momentum to take decisive, defiant action against the monarchy's rigid authority. A faint sly smile crossed her face as she murmured low and deliberate that meetings were meetings, decisions were decisions. But she would rearrange everything in her own way that night. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Hill bowed in complete obedience, knowing full well that there was no stopping the Queen once her mind had been made up. Later, recounting the events, Mrs. Hill said that when she looked into the Queen's eyes, they were the eyes of someone resolved, someone determined to go all the way, willing to counter humiliation with every ounce of strength. As the afternoon sun fell, King Charles returned to the library, walking through the hall with an air of satisfaction, pleased with the progress, and certain that all was unfolding according to plan. Little did he know that in the adjacent room, his wife, Camilla, was preparing a fire of her own, one that would shake the monarchy's balance and authority to its core. The Queen pulled out a copy of the state banquet plan, meticulously approved by the secretary, detailing everything from opening speeches to closing credits, including Charles's carefully curated guest list. She read and reread the pages, her eyes narrowing in icy calculation. Every line excluded her. Every paragraph erased her presence, and the spark of fury in her heart ignited. In a defiant act, she set the document ablaze, watching as the flames consumed the pages, the fire reflecting the burning pride and dignity she refused to have denied that night. Charles entered the room and froze, fists clenched, his eyes a mix of anger, shock, and numbness. He questioned her, but Camilla paid no heed. She merely stared at the fire, her gaze cold and unyielding, letting the blaze silently speak for her. Witnesses later said that in that moment, the fire devoured the last remnants of affection he had for her. The question hung in the air. Had Camilla finally claimed the attention she craved, or would she go even further to ensure her presence was undeniable? What she did next escalated the storm. This was the Queen's battlefield, her coup d'etat. With the king still paralyzed by shock, Camilla moved with ruthless speed, refusing to be satisfied by mere symbolic defiance. The silence of the king became fuel, spurring her to assert dominance over the royal household. The next day, she called upon Mrs. Hill. The fire in her heart demanded more than destruction. it demanded control. Everything in the palace needed to reflect her authority, to suit her vision, and to center her as the main character. Orders were given with precision, and her first act was merciless. Loyalists and staff deemed obstacles were dismissed overnight via Ter's impersonal phone calls. Decades of service were ignored, swept aside like ashes. By dawn, her own handpicked team, carefully chosen from trusted Wilshire allies, had arrived, replacing the old guard. A silent coup had been executed. Authority was overturned, and the Queen had finally taken the first decisive step in reshaping the royal household to her will. The sudden arrival of the new staff swept through the royal walls like a tidal wave. Their energy threw the remaining household into a state of panic, confusion, and fear. Loyalties were tested, centuries of careful protocol cast aside, and whispers of what is happening echoed through the corridors of Windsor. Meanwhile, all eyes secretly wondered, what was the Queen doing in the midst of this chaos? The castle became the front lines of a silent, escalating war. Camilla's coup was audacious, bold, and unmistakably personal. On her direct orders, the COO executed moves that sent shock waves through every loyalist. Iconic portraits of the late Queen Elizabeth Roman, too, were removed from the grand corridor walls, replaced with towering formal portraits of Camilla herself. The message was clear: the Elizabethan era was over, and a new queen had seized absolute control. Every inch of the castle transformed into her private court. Carpets, colors, monuments, and even the grand banquet were remade in her modern, glamorous image. King Charles remained isolated, reportedly ill, a prisoner in his own home, watching in silent disdain as his authority was systematically dismantled. Disgruntled, frustrated, and stunned, he immediately called upon Prince William. Help was needed fast, but a coup fueled by shock alone is never enough. True control demands truth, strength, and dignity. A weakened king may feel alone, but no monarch ever truly is. Prince William's arrival that night would become the turning point. He entered the castle and found what once felt like home transformed into a battlefield of fear, chaos, and competing loyalties. Portraits of his grandmother were gone, and the staff moved like shadows, fearful of the Queen's wrath. Confusion reigned, but William needed only a moment to grasp the gravity of the situation. He approached his father, the head of the household, with urgency and clarity. Confrontation was unavoidable. He framed Camilla's actions not as modernization or progressive vision, but as a reckless, self-serving coup, one that dishonored the late Queen's legacy, endangered the institution they had worked to protect, and handed their critics an undeniable victory. He argued passionately, "This isn't strength, it's anarchy." William's words cut through the tension, a reminder that loyalty, family, and the crown itself depended on decisive action. That conversation was the wake-up call King Charles desperately needed. The husband's mental paralysis, frozen by loyalty and love, finally shattered, giving way to the resolute king he had been trained to be for decades. His lifetime of preparation, his sacred duty to the crown, overpowered personal allegiance in an instant. The decision once made was absolute, chillingly formal, and irrevocable. A decree was drawn up and signed by the king's own hand. Camilla was to be immediately and indefinitely suspended from all public life. The decree didn't stay hidden. The media pounced, headlines erupting before the morning sun. Yet officially, the Queen's absence was framed as a prolonged sick leave from all duties. Her destination described as a remote abbey in Yorkshire, a sanctuary of religious silence, reflection, and solitude. Her silent coup, bold and audacious, was met with an equally silent and secretive exile in the dead of night. A convoy of dark, unmarked cars whisked her away from Windsor, leaving behind the palace she had sought to reshape. The Queen, who demanded a new reign, had been erased from it completely, as though she had never existed. The vehicle itself carried no royal emblem, no sign of privilege, a ghostly procession meant to evade the ever-watchful media. Her arrival at the Abbey was met with quiet stillness, minimal facilities, and the humbling austerity of a life stripped of pomp and circumstance. She had become invisible, unarmed from power, and trapped in solitude with only her thoughts and the austere walls for company. Inside the abbey, she was forced to confront her actions and their consequences. Shocked and humbled, she could not protest. The deed had been done too quickly, too decisively. Her fury, her ambition, the fire that had driven her through the palace halls. It had all been met with a force that completely overwhelmed her. She stayed in a solitary room, her queenly luxuries stripped away as the days passed slowly and silently, each one echoing her absence from the life she had sought to control. When the truth eventually reached the public, the media painted King Charles as a leader of remarkable restraint and clarity, calm, composed, and unwavering in the midst of what could have been a catastrophic crisis. He became the standard-bearer of disciplined authority. Meanwhile, Camilla's name floated quietly, neither mentioned with contempt nor admiration. The wildfire of her ambitions had burned out, leaving only ash, and the world moved on within days. It was the Queen's ultimate nightmare realized, forgotten, unseen, irrelevant. Her legacy, her rebellion, her presence, all reduced to whispers and shadows. What do you think of King Charles's final decision to exile his own queen? Was it the calculated act of a monarch protecting the crown, or a cruel overreaction to ambition? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal revelations. Click the next video showing on your screen. You won't want to miss